In a quiet valley surrounded by rolling hills and golden wheat fields, there lived an aging gardener named Elias. His cottage stood at the edge of the village, simple and weathered, but always surrounded by flowers. Every morning before sunrise, Elias carried a wooden yoke across his shoulders. From each end of the yoke hung a clay jar tied with thick rope. He would walk a narrow dirt path that wound down toward the river at the base of the hill. One jar was smooth, polished, and perfectly shaped. It gleamed softly in the early light. The other jar was different. A thin fracture ran from its neck to its rounded belly. It had been there for years. No matter how carefully Elias carried it, water slowly dripped from the crack during the long walk back uphill. The perfect jar often boasted quietly. "I carry my full share every day," it would say as the morning breeze rustled past them. Not a single drop wasted. The cracked jar remained silent. It felt the slow rhythm of water escaping through its flaw. Drip, drip, drip. By the time they reached the cottage, it was only half full, and every day shame weighed heavier than the water it could not hold. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. The cracked jar watched the other jar stand tall in the garden shed at night, clean, useful, complete. "I am tired of embarrassing myself," the cracked jar whispered one evening as Elias placed them down after the morning's work. The perfect jar gave a faint clink of superiority. "Perhaps you simply weren't made well," it replied. "Some clay is stronger than others." The words stung deeper than the fracture itself. The cracked jar remembered the day it was formed, the warmth of the kiln, the hands that shaped it, the pride it once felt. But somewhere along the years, a small impact against a stone had created that first hairline split. It had never been the same. The jar began to dread the daily journey. Every step uphill felt like failure measured in droplets. One afternoon, unable to bear the guilt any longer, the cracked jar finally spoke to Elias as he rested beneath an olive tree. "Master," it began hesitantly, "why do you keep me? I lose half of what you gather. I have watched the other jar. It delivers everything faithfully. I delivered disappointment." Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he smiled softly, as if he had been waiting for this question. The next morning, Elias spoke as they walked. "Today," he said gently, "I want you to look down as we return home." The cracked jar felt confused but obeyed. As they climbed the winding hill, sunlight stretched across the earth. The jar looked to the right side of the path, the side it hung upon. Wildflowers, hundreds of them. Soft bluebells, bright marigolds, delicate white daisies. They danced in the morning breeze, their petals glowing in the golden light. The cracked jar blinked, if a jar could blink. It had never truly looked. Then it turned its attention to the opposite side, the side of the perfect jar. The soil there was dry, bare, dusty. No flowers bloomed along that edge of the path. The cracked jar felt something stir inside, not pride yet, but confusion. Elias continued walking quietly. When they reached the cottage, he filled vases with freshly cut flowers, all gathered from the side where the cracked jar had dripped water for years. That evening, villagers came by to purchase bouquets. Children laughed as they held colorful blossoms. Brides chose flowers for weddings. The scent filled the small home with sweetness. The cracked jar trembled. Had it done this? As twilight settled, Elias carried the jars inside and sat beside them. "My dear friend," he said softly to the cracked jar, "I noticed your fracture long ago." The jar listened in stunned silence. "I could have replaced you," Elias continued. "It would have been simple. But I chose not to." He paused, tracing the crack gently with his fingers. "Instead, I planted seeds along your side of the path. I knew you would water them every morning without even trying." The cracked jar felt warmth spread through its clay walls. "You thought you were losing water," Elias said, "but you were giving life." The perfect jar said nothing. For the first time, it understood that fullness was not the same as purpose. Elias leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. "Perfection holds," he murmured, "but imperfection nourishes." The cracked jar no longer felt broken. It felt chosen. The days that followed felt different. The cracked jar no longer shrank beneath the weight of comparison. Each drip felt intentional now, almost sacred. Yet something unexpected began to grow inside it. Fear. What if one day the crack widened too much? What if it shattered completely? What if Elias finally decided that even flowers were not worth the loss? The perfect jar, though quieter now, still held its polished silence like armor. One morning, as mist hovered low over the valley, the perfect jar finally spoke. "So," it said carefully, "you are proud of your leaking now?" The cracked jar hesitated. I don't know if proud is the word. I simply understand." "Understand?" the perfect jar replied. "You still cannot carry your full share." The words did not wound as deeply as before, but they did echo. The cracked jar looked down again at the blooming side of the path. Butterflies drifted from petal to petal. Bees hummed gently in their morning rhythm. "I carry differently," the cracked jar answered softly. Elias smiled, though neither jar saw it. Then summer came, harsher than any in recent memory. The river shrank, its edges receded, exposing cracked earth where water once flowed freely. The villagers whispered anxiously in the marketplace. "If the rain does not come," they said, "our crops will fail." Elias continued his walks, but the river now offered less water each morning. He filled both jars carefully. The cracked jar felt a familiar shame creeping back. This time, it thought, my leaking will truly be waste. As they climbed the hill, droplets fell again onto the flowered side of the path, but now the soil was thirsty beyond measure. The perfect jar spoke quietly. "Perhaps now you see. In times of scarcity, flaws cost more." The cracked jar had no reply. By the time they reached the cottage, even the flowers seemed weaker. Petals drooped, colors dulled. That night, the cracked jar could not rest. "If only I were whole," it whispered into the darkness. "If only I could hold everything." Days passed with no rain. Yet something strange began to happen. While other gardens in the village wilted, Elias's flower beds, though not lush, still survived. Their roots had grown deeper over the years, strengthened by consistent watering along the path. The cracked jar had not merely watered the surface. It had trained resilience into the soil. One afternoon, a young mother arrived at Elias's cottage. She held her daughter's hand tightly. "My child is ill," she said. "She has not smiled in weeks." Elias handed her a small bundle of marigolds and bluebells, the brightest remaining blossoms. "Place these by her bedside," he said gently. 2 days later, the mother returned, tears shining in her eyes. "She laughed," she whispered, "for the first time in so long." The cracked jar trembled again. Even in drought, something beautiful endured. Then, without warning, the sky darkened. Thunder rolled across the valley like a drumbeat from the heavens. Rain poured down in sheets so heavy it blurred the world. The river swelled overnight, roaring louder than it had in years. Elias waited until morning before making the walk again. The path had changed. Where flowers once lined one side, many now lay flattened by the storm. Mud covered the earth. Petals scattered. The cracked jar felt heartbreak. "All that work," it murmured, "was it temporary?" As they walked, something else became clear. The side that had once been dry and hard, the perfect jar's side, had suffered deep erosion. Water rushed down the bare slope without roots to anchor the soil. But on the flowered side, though petals were bent, the ground remained firm. The roots held it together. The cracked jar's slow leaking had not only grown beauty, it had built strength. Elias stopped halfway up the hill and spoke softly. "Beauty fades," he said, "but what grows beneath it can protect the future." The perfect jar said nothing at all. For the first time, it felt something new. Not pride, not superiority. Envy. That evening, as sunlight returned to the valley, the cracked jar reflected on everything. It had once believed that value meant holding everything tightly. Now it understood something deeper. Value sometimes meant releasing. Not all loss is failure. Not all cracks are damage. Some are openings through which life flows. The perfect jar finally spoke again, but its voice was softer than ever before. "I have always kept everything," it said, "yet nothing has grown because of me." The cracked jar did not respond with triumph. Instead, it answered gently, "We were both made as we are." Silence settled peacefully between them, and for the first time in many years, neither jar compared itself to the other. They simply waited for morning. Though peace had settled between the jars, the cracked jar could not fully silence a quiet fear. Each day the fracture widened ever so slightly. Seasons of heat and cold had stretched its clay. The line that once seemed thin now branched into smaller veins, like lightning frozen in earth. One morning, as Elias lowered the jars into the river, the cracked jar felt a sharp sting along its side. A small piece of clay loosened. The jar said nothing, but it knew. Time was carving its final chapter. On the walk back, the perfect jar spoke, not with pride this time, but concern. "You are weakening." "Yes," the cracked jar answered calmly. "Are you afraid?" The cracked jar watched droplets fall onto the roots below. "A little," it admitted, "but I am no longer ashamed." The perfect jar absorbed those words in silence. It happened on an ordinary morning. The sky was pale blue. The air carried the scent of early autumn. Elias walked slowly, humming an old tune under his breath. Halfway up the hill, the cracked jar felt a sudden shift. The rope tightened awkwardly against its neck. A stone beneath Elias's sandal rolled unexpectedly. The world tilted. The jar slipped. Time seemed to slow as it fell. It struck the ground with a sound that echoed across the valley. Sharp, final, undeniable. Clay shattered into scattered fragments. Water spilled freely into the soil. The perfect jar hung frozen in place. Elias stood still for a long moment. Then, slowly, he knelt. He did not sigh in frustration. He did not curse the accident. Instead, he began gathering the pieces carefully, one by one. "Thank you," he whispered softly. That afternoon, Elias did not discard the fragments. Instead, he arranged them along the garden's edge, pressing the curved pieces gently into the soil to create a mosaic border around the flower beds. The larger shard, the one that once held the widest part of the crack, he placed upright near the path, filling it with earth and planting a single sunflower inside. Days passed. Rain fell lightly. The sunflower sprouted strong and tall, its golden face turning faithfully toward the sun. Villagers began noticing the new garden border. Children traced their fingers along the smooth, broken pieces, marveling at their shapes. "What beautiful stones," they said. "They were once a jar," Elias would answer. The perfect jar watched all of this quietly. It had expected disappearance. Instead, it witnessed transformation. Without the cracked jar beside it, the perfect jar felt something unexpected: emptiness. Its side of the path remained bare still. One morning, as Elias prepared for the river, he lifted only the perfect jar. The walk felt unbalanced. The yoke tilted slightly to one side. At the riverbank, Elias filled the jar as usual, but before returning home, he did something different. He dipped his hand into the water and splashed a trail along the opposite side of the path, the side that had always remained dry. Each morning thereafter, he repeated the gesture. Not as much water as the cracked jar once gave, but enough. Weeks later, small green shoots began appearing on that once barren edge. The perfect jar watched in awe. It finally understood. Perfection had never been the goal. Participation was. Years passed. Elias grew older. His steps slowed. The village changed. Children became adults. Seasons turned in quiet rhythm. But the path remained. On one side bloomed generations of flowers rooted deep from years of steady dripping. On the other side, new growth slowly took shape, tended intentionally. And near the garden gate stood the tall sunflower, growing each year from seeds of the first. Travelers passing through the valley would often pause. "What is this place?" they would ask. And villagers would reply, "This is the path of the jar that leaked light." They did not say it with pity. They said it with reverence. Imperfection is not the opposite of worth. It is often the doorway to impact. The cracked jar never held everything, but it gave consistently. It did not choose its fracture, but it chose not to let shame define it. And when its time ended, its purpose did not. Because value is not measured by how much you keep. It is measured by what grows because you were here. Some people are like the perfect jar, strong, steady, whole. Some are like the cracked jar, flawed, uncertain, quietly giving more than they know. Both matter, but only one turned its weakness into a garden. And that is why, in the valley surrounded by golden fields, flowers still bloom along one side of the path, nourished by drops that once felt like failure. You may see your cracks as loss. Others may compare you to those who seem whole. But perhaps, without realizing it, you are watering something that would never grow without you. And perhaps one day, long after you fear you have broken, the world will still be blooming, because you were willing to drip,